To Wi-Fi streaming with Ben Miller. I am live back on Twitch. Good to see everybody back here. Thank you for joining. Sorry I'm a little bit late today. Doing a 10:30 start. Those of you that follow me on Twitter may know why. My best friend just had his first baby today. And, you know, or I guess technically it was last night, but I got the call or the text this morning saying the kid is ready to be seen. And as much as I love the Twitch community, don't get me wrong, you know, wanted to make sure I was there to support my pal. And so yeah, so starting a half hour late today, just putting out the tweet right now to let folks know I am live on Twitch. Today's topic, hospital Wi-Fi assessment. So that's what we're going to look at is, you know, obviously it's you know, being gone makes it a little bit tricky to, I suppose I could have had a whole thing prepared, but actually being in the hospital made me think that that is a topic. Sort of doing a quick assessment of a Wi-Fi environment is a topic that some folks may be interested in. You know, a fair amount of what I've talked about on these Twitch streams is a little bit more about sort of, you know, the standards of Wi-Fi and how different protocols work. A little bit less of it has been hands-on. You know, unfortunately, I couldn't do the stream from the hospital. That'd be nice to be able to kind of do things live and show you what I'm seeing. But I tried to record or save as much as I could. It's not a ton, but it's just a little bit of capture, a little bit of screenshotting from the Adrian Granados application from the Wi-Fi Explorer application. And so I want to share that with you all and, you know, give you a chance to kind of see at least my point of view on how you can go into a site and kind of at least get an idea of how the Wi-Fi might be working, whether there are things that can potentially be adjusted. One thing I didn't have access to that you typically do want to have access to when doing any kind of site assessment is floor plans. I did not have access to all the floor plans and all of the wireless access point locations at the hospital where my pal was having a kid. So I wasn't able to kind of fully do that, but yeah, that's the idea of what I want to share with you all today. Yeah, you know, first and foremost, apologies for the late start. I definitely try to make it a 10 a.m. start every Wednesday, 10 a.m. Pacific time, that is, start every Wednesday. That's 6 p.m. UK time, 8 p.m. in Helsinki. Yeah, didn't quite do that. A little bit late with the old start today. But yeah, hopefully some of you will still be able to join in. And, you know, I always put the archives stay on Twitch for 2 weeks. And then I always put the archives on YouTube. And so you can always go on the YouTube channel to check out the archives. I really oughta... I'm still a little bit new and everything to the whole Twitch thing and the whole YouTube thing. So let me do the little hello to make sure my chat is working. I'm not logged into the chat. Just worried that that might be the case. So yeah, so I you know, let's see here. Actually, my volume level doesn't look great. Hold on just. Okay, hopefully that'll, yeah, that should level things out a little bit. You might have, might notice a little bit of a loss of volume compared to what it was. It was going just a little bit into the red. Prefer to avoid that. Let's bring up some of the stuff here that, give me just a moment to get myself logged into the old Twitch so that we have it on chat. Now I should be able to say hello to everybody. There we go. Okay, now I'm in the chat room. Good. Yeah, so So the topic, and I guess I haven't brought up the topic yet, so let me do that here real quickly. The topic for today is kind of just a quick hospital assessment, and the idea here, as I'm going through the hospital assessment, part of it is to talk about things to look for, but part of it is also to talk a little bit about the use of two tools that I find very, very useful, which are Wi-Fi scanners and Wi-Fi protocol analyzers. And so that's kind of the idea for this week. Is I'll talk about some of the things that at least I would look for. Now, today wasn't like a job. You know, I was going to the hospital to say hello to my pal's new baby, but you know, so this was just as a visitor. This wasn't like an official thing or anything like that. But still, you know, hopefully I can give you an idea of at least what I would typically look for when trying to do an assessment of a hospital or really of any site. You know, even if it's not a hospital, even if it's an office, even if it's a you know, a retail location, whatever, a school, you know, a high school or something like that. Just talk a little bit about kind of the process that at least I would go through and that I would recommend going through. And then also talk about the usage of these two tools. Sorry, got a little thing going on down here. Yeah, also talk about those two tools, the scanner and the protocol analyzer. Those are definitely kind of my go-to on-site tools. I am, like I think many networking folks are, a big believer in doing as much as you can without having to go on-site. Going on-site can be time-consuming. If you send other people on site, sometimes you can get communication errors and things of that nature. So I am a big believer in trying to have a good sort of setup of the network so that you can, you know, so that you have the ability to centrally, you know, remotely analyze things, manage things, etc., so that you can minimize the amount of time that you have to go on site. But the reality is this is wireless. A lot of on-site things can cause issues, and so that's what I want to talk about here today is kind of some of those issues we might see and what tools we might use to solve them. Before I get into it, the little quick intro here. If you're not already following me on Twitter, Ben Miller is my Twitter handle. Appreciate the follows. Definitely, if you do decide to follow me on Twitter, feel free to, you know, send a little message to me, you know, tag me in something. That way I can follow you back. I don't have an automatic refollow back policy just because there are a lot of bots and such on Twitter. But always happy to follow back folks who work in networking or Wi-Fi. Obviously, this is my Twitch handle. That's where you're at right now. The blog, I still have a blog post that's remained unpublished for a couple weeks now. I still got to go through the final edit on the blog. And if you need to contact me outside of any of the social media stuff, there's my email address, ben_miller@icloud.com. You know, look, I do work as a contractor within the Wi-Fi world and always looking for work. So if you do have anything on the assessment side of things, like I'm going to be talking about today, on the design side of things, I also do technical writing. I also do marketing writing. I've taught a lot of Wi-Fi classes. I actually love the teaching part of the job. And so, yeah, so if you have needs for any of those things, definitely drop me a line and, you know, maybe we can make something happen. Who knows? But yeah, so let's get into it. Let's talk a little bit about kind of going to the doing an assessment somewhere. And so, you know, I always like to start out by talking about kind of the process or the steps that one might go through when doing some type of assessment. And you know, step number one is just determining, is an on-site assessment needed? Hopefully the answer is no. Again, I like to try to do as much as I can without having to go to the location of the user for the reasons I mentioned before. It can be time consuming. If you send other people, there can be communication issues. It can be disruptive to the user. So you'd like to solve as many issues as you can sort of in-house. But let's say it is needed. You know, for example, what I'm talking about there is you have a problem, or you are trying to do something kind of preventative. So either you have an open trouble ticket, or somehow or other you've heard about there being Wi-Fi issues at a given location, or, you know, that would kind of be the problem side of it, or you're trying to do something preventative. You have a big event coming up in some area, you have a new deployment, maybe you're just going through some type of regular refresh. Maybe you say to yourself, well, once every year, or once every couple years, or once every 6 months, maybe you decide that you want to do assessments of some of your kind of local areas of some of the areas of your enterprise, the classrooms of your schools, or the office areas that your company owns or leases, and you decide that you want to kind of try to prevent Wi-Fi issues from coming up so that you don't get those trouble tickets. So, you know, number one, do you have a problem, or is there something preventative? Number two, have you looked at the floor plan along with the access point locations? And of course, this could also be antenna locations if you're using external antennas. Have you looked at those, and does that perhaps give you an indication of why you have a problem, or does that perhaps raise red flags if you're doing something preventative? You know, sometimes that can be the case. Sometimes you can see, for example, I'll try to diagram out something that I saw when I was at USC. We had kind of this odd shaped building here. I don't know if I'm going to do a great job of drawing what it looked like, but it was kind of this rectangular building with these kind of lab areas going out in the corners. I don't know if I'm doing a great job of drawing this, but if you can imagine, there's these lab areas out in the corners, and you would come up, you know, let's say the elevator would be in one of the corners, or you'd have a stairwell in one of the corners, and you'd come out of a hallway, and there were hallways kind of going through the interior of this building here, and there were labs in the and you had paths either, you know, to the lab that was in the corner, and you had these labs that were kind of off the hallways that would have to have good Wi-Fi coverage. And we had gotten a trouble ticket coming in saying that someone in one of the labs was having some type of problem with the Wi-Fi, and when I looked at the floor plans that we had, the access points were all inside the hallways, kind of at the corners here of the facility. And so, you know, that was just a little bit of a red flag before ever having to go on site to do any kind of troubleshooting of the problem, to try to figure out why there might have been an issue. And I guess I should give some dimensions here to give you an idea of why this might have been an issue. I mean, these labs were pretty long. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I would say it was probably somewhere between 30 to 40 feet from the edge of the hallway to the back of the lab. For those of you that go by the metric system, let's say that's about 10 to 13 meters from the front of the lab to the back of the lab. So you had this access point that was out in a hallway. You had this very, very deep lab. And so without ever having to go on site, I could already see that, you know, this area might have some issues just with the location of the access points. Number one, when it comes to hallway access points, you tend to have a little bit of a higher likelihood of interference between access points. These are kind of open, clear spaces between the access points, and so you're likely to get a very, very strong signal between access points, and probably a little bit of a weaker signal to client devices. You know, the client devices that might be inside of these rooms here, the little laptops or the smartphones. That's not a great drawing of a laptop. But the laptops, the smartphones, whatever other devices that are Wi-Fi that might be inside the labs, they have a wall between them, and these happen to be relatively thick walls. So they had a little bit of a wall between them. They had a little bit more distance between them. And when it came to access point communication, it was just an open hallway. And so you kind of have the higher likelihood of interference, the lower likelihood of getting a strong signal. And so just by looking at the floor plan, you could kind of get an idea that there might be a problem. Sometimes, though, you don't necessarily get an idea that there's a problem just by looking at a floor plan. You may see that there are plenty of access points. You might have a case where your access points are not in the hallway and you have an access point kind of inside each lab. And so it may not necessarily look like there might be a problem from looking at the floor plan. But that's always kind of a good place to start. Another thing that I always like to do before determining whether it's really needed to go on site is try to talk to the user and get an idea if there might be some type of client issue that's happening there. Sometimes your level 1 support might be able to take care of that. If you have proper communication with your level 1 support folks, you can sometimes make it so the level 1 support folks can run users through a series of steps that can help you identify and solve kind of typical client problems, known client problems. Sometimes, especially if there have been OS updates, the level 1 support folks may not have as much of an idea of whether there are known device issues. And so you can kind of, you might have to have that escalated so that you can do a little bit of research on the device. I think I've kind of talked about it a little bit already in previous streams about some of the tools you can use to get an idea of client issues. A lot of times you can use kind of software that's on the client. On client tools to give you some kind of diagnostic of what's happening. I don't want to go too deep into that. That's not exactly the number one point of this stream this week. But you can definitely use some on-client tools. I've talked before about the Airport utility for Apple iOS devices. I've talked before about Aruba utilities for Android. Even if you're not an Aruba organization, even if you use some other vendor for your infrastructure, Aruba makes a very, very nice client utility for Android that allows you to do some diagnostics, allows you to do some troubleshooting. I don't know if I have any screenshots of it. I might have a screenshot here of Aruba utilities and what that looks like. I might not be able to find it easily enough to bring it up right away, but yeah, it's something that can definitely be useful. Let me see if I can find anything that I might have had there. Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily have any screenshots of the Aruba utilities offhand. Yeah, I might not have anything that's kind of easily accessible. I'll have to get another couple screenshots and make sure I have those present and ready for you all to be able to see here. Let's see here. Yeah, I don't know if I have anything. Yeah, I don't have anything that's kind of easily accessible, so I'll have to save that for another time. But yeah, that's one thing you can use. For Mac users, there's a number of different ways that you can view information about your environment. That here I'm on a Mac, so just to kind of show you what can be viewed. Give me just a moment here. So hopefully you can see my mouse there. There's the kind of the Wi-Fi icon at the top of the screen. If you hold down the Alt key or the Option key, notice you get a little bit of extra information here. This is just built into the Mac OS. You can get a little bit of extra information about your connection. And then if you're curious about nearby connections, if you're curious about nearby access points and the potential for interference, there's this wireless diagnostics tool. If I open up the wireless diagnostics tool, there's this scan window if I want to see nearby access points. So, I can order these access points by signal strength to see what's stronger or what's weaker, what's nearby me. There's also a sniffer if you want to do a capture to kind of see what a little bit more detail. A protocol analyzer is something that allows you to analyze the Wi-Fi traffic that has already been captured. So doing a capture using this tool can kind of be a good first step towards kind of looking at what's going on in your area. But yeah, so and unfortunately, I'm gonna have to kind of restart the whiteboard. I don't have the whiteboard thing totally saved. But again, I'm going into kind of, is this needed? That's kind of the number one step. And I might look at floor plans. I might look at client device information. And then I also might look at some type of management or monitoring appliance. Some type of console. If you're if you work with Aruba, that would be Aruba Airwave. If you work with Cisco, that would be Cisco Prime Infrastructure. Those are kind of the management tools. As far as a monitoring tool, I've mentioned before, I definitely have an affinity for the Voyance tool. Voyance is from a company called Niansa. They're maybe not as well known of a company. They just got bought out not that long ago by VMware, but that's a little bit more of a monitoring tool. And then you can also use the CLI as well. There may be commands that you can run that can give you information about your environment, that can let you know if client devices have a strong signal or a weak signal, if client devices are sending lots of data or very little data, if client devices are sending and receiving wireless traffic at high data rates or low data rates, if client devices are sending data that has a high percentage, or receiving data from the access points, I guess, that has a high percentage of collisions or a low percentage of collisions. These are all things that you can identify. And again, some of those things are, the number of clients that might be connected to a given access point, the data rates that an access point is using, the amount of data, or the amount of frames, the amount of bytes of data. That can be a useful diagnostic thing to look at. The number of collisions, and these are Wi-Fi collisions, not network collisions. Perhaps a percentage of the collisions that are happening on a network. Also getting an idea of neighboring access points, and the channels that those neighboring access points are on, to see if you might have an issue of some type. That's all information that you may be able to get from various commands. That's information that you may be able to get from your monitoring console, something like Avoidance. I know Aruba Networks has Net Insight. I know Cisco has DNA. Mist, essentially, Mist is another Wi-Fi vendor, relatively prominent vendor. Honestly, the way I look at Mist is just like a normal Wi-Fi vendor, but with Voyance built in. Mist just does a bunch of monitoring diagnostics and such that allow you to view the status of your network. So that's kind of step number one, is I want to determine, is an assessment even needed? And hopefully the answer is going to be no. Hopefully you're able to look at your floor plans, look at whatever statistics, etc., and you'll be able to resolve whatever issue you might have. I mean, and of course, in a lot of cases, it could also just be a network issue. It could be a wired network issue or a network security issue. You may not have a wireless issue at all. I'm always a big believer in ownership. So, if an issue is known, if there's like a trouble ticket of some type, or if I'm trying to do something that is preventative, then I want to sort of cover the wireless side first. I want to look at the wireless side as closely as I can, try to identify any issues that we might potentially have on the wireless side before going in and kind of handing it off and saying, hey, security folks, can you take a look at the firewall settings and whatever routing or switch settings you might have, whatever security tools you might have set up on the network that might be causing an issue. And networking folks, can you look at the way the network is set up in terms of whatever, in terms of VLANs, in terms of routing, to make, to try to make sure that wireless performance isn't being compromised here. Those things are definitely important, don't get me wrong, but at least the way I like to approach it is start by really being thorough with the wireless side, and then if the wireless side looks like it's in good shape, then kind of handing it off and saying, hey, can we check on security stuff, or can we check on the networking side of things to see if we might have some type of issue that is that's compromising wireless performance. So that's kind of what I always like to start with is hopefully you can avoid these assessments entirely. Now, the reality is there tend to be cases where you need to do the assessment. Sometimes you need to do the assessment because you have a specific problem or because you're doing something preventative. Sometimes you might need to do the assessment to just justify changes that you want to be able to make. You may be able to look at the floor plans or to look at some of this information that you get from your monitoring tool or from your CLI. You may be able to look at that and say, yeah, it looks like we have a Wi-Fi issue here. It looks like in this area there's too many wireless access points, or in that area there's not enough wireless access points, or the location of these access points kind of isn't exactly where we want it to be. We want to get the APs closer to the window because this is an exterior wall and we're worried about interference from outside the building. So we need the APs closer to the edge so that people who are working or who are doing something near the windows get a nice strong signal to kind of, strong signal near the window to kind of overwhelm whatever interference they're getting. We don't want the APs way inside on the building so that people that are near the windows are having interference issues, because of stuff that's outside of the building. So, you may be able to kind of identify some of the things you might need to fix, but you might need to still do a little bit more research in order to be able to convince other people that those changes need to be made. You need to do what I like to call publicity. And I realize that for some folks in the technology fields, the word publicity has a very negative connotation. People kind of think publicity and they might think, oh, that's just BS, or that's just, what salespeople do, but I really do mean publicity from, as kind of a positive thing. It's just, that's human nature. Is if something is unknown to you, you're going to be skeptical. You hear someone say, well, we need to make this or that. Let's take the example that I was talking about before. I have my little building here, and one of the issues was, the access points were kind of towards the inside of the building in that hallway that was running through the middle there. And we want to get access points closer to the edges of the buildings because there could be people walking by, and the Wi-Fi coming from people's devices that are outside the building could cause interference on the edges. So we wanted to kind of make sure that these access points get moved in a little bit, make sure that these access points are closer to the edge of the building. But, you might be saying that to someone, and people may not be aware of that. They may not have heard of that design kind of philosophy of getting access points closer to exterior walls to prevent outside interference from being a problem. And so you may have to do a little, what I like to call publicity, to try to sort of show what's what can happen, to show kind of some of the issues that can happen when the design isn't the way that you think it should be. And so when I say going through a little publicity, I don't mean to have that be a negative connotation. It's just a way of communicating to people who may have different areas of expertise than you do. They may not be as familiar with Wi-Fi design principles, and so you're sort of trying to communicate to them. You're giving them a little bit of publicity of, hey, you know, here's what we're seeing when we go in this building. So that can be a big part of on-site assessments. You may be doing the on-site assessment to do to troubleshoot something specific and kind of get new information that you didn't know. You may also just be doing the on-site assessment to gather data that you can then use for publicity. Like, you may already know by looking at the floor plan, etc., okay, here's where our problem lies, but if you need to convince people, if you need to publicize your findings a little bit, then you may want to do some type of on-site assessment. So now you've decided, yes, the on-site assessment is needed. Then what's the next step? You know, what would the next thing you want to be? Number 2, I would say go to the location of the device, location of the problem, or the location where you're trying to do your preventative assessment. You want to get to that location, and if possible, you want to have some type of production device available. Now, I realize this part can be very, very tricky. Let me show you an example of what I'm talking about here, just from what I saw at the hospital earlier on today. So it's like, let's assume that the decision, you know, let's assume that I was part of this hospital's organization or whatever, or if they had brought me in to do some type of contract work. So I go to the hospital. So number 1 is already a yes. They've already decided, yes, we need to do some type of on-site assessment. Number 2, I go to the hallway or the room or the nurse's station or wherever it is in the hospital where there's an issue or where they're trying to do preventative Wi-Fi assessments. So I go to that location, and then the next thing I want to do is I want to get access to a production device. That may not be entirely simple. You know, let's take a look here. I want to get a little bit into Wireshark. Let me close out of wireless diagnostics here. Let me share with you the Wireshark capture that I got from this location. So here's a look at the Wireshark capture. You can see they're using a Cisco infrastructure there. And what I want to do for you, you know, one of the things that I want to do here is I want to show you just kind of how many networks they have set up at this hospital, because that, you know, that's indicative, or can be indicative, of the fact that it might not be particularly easy to get your hands on a production device. The hospital or wherever it is that you're, you know, whatever facility that you're working at, just may not allow you to easily do troubleshooting with a production device. And so for this hospital, this is a little kind of thing that you can do in Wireshark if you want to. What I'm looking for at here is destination broadcast, because a very, very common broadcast destination frame is what you see under the info column. Hopefully you can see that right in the middle under the info column. A very common destination thing you can see is this beacon frame. And to kind of back up real quickly for a second, if you're wondering, well, you know, Ben, how do I get this stuff? What am I really looking at here? For those of you that may be a little bit less familiar with wireless protocol analyzers and what I'm looking at here, what I'm looking at here is a application called Wireshark. It is a completely free application, and you can find Wireshark at wireshark.org. I'll kind of show you that a little bit here. Wireshark.org. Just putting that into the chat area. Let me share wireshark.org with you all. Give me just a moment here. There it is. Okay, so now you can see Wireshark a little bit. Let me, oops. That wasn't what I wanted. There we go. Maybe this. Nope, that's not it either. Ah, there we go. There. Now I'm getting Wireshark where I wanted it. Okay. So yeah, this is wireshark.org. That's where you can go to download the Wireshark application. You can see here the little thing that says download. You click on that, and then you can find whichever operating system you are using. I'm using Mac OS. You can see here there are Windows installers. It's completely free software. And especially if you're a Mac user, I encourage you to get a hold of Wireshark. Because the idea here, and let me see if I can get that, whoops, back where I want it to be. There we go. So yeah, the idea here is that if you're a Mac user, you can use that little wireless diagnostics that I talked about earlier. Opening the wireless diagnostics. Here's my wireless diagnostics window, and going to this sniffer window. And in the sniffer window, if you were to click start, you can kind of choose what channel you want to capture on. You can choose the width of the channel that you want to capture on. And then when you click start, your Mac will start capturing traffic. Now, you will lose any kind of Wi-Fi connection you have. When a Wi-Fi adapter is doing sniffing, the Wi-Fi adapter is doing something called monitor mode. And a Wi-Fi adapter in monitor mode loses its ability to have any kind of network connection. The monitor mode adapter is just listening. It's not able to have any kind of network connection. So, don't do this right now if you're connected to Twitch via Wi-Fi. That's why I can't click start right now. But it shows you there. You'll be able to find your captures in the var/temp folder. I'll show you what that folder looks like here. I did a little shortcut to it, but you can hopefully see it down at the bottom of the screen. Var temp. That's where the folder is located. And so if you go to that var temp, and if you don't already have this set up, you can always go to the Go menu. Go to folders. You can see it right there, /var/tmp. You click that and it'll show you the contents of the var temp folder. So the idea is you open wireless diagnostics, you go to the sniffer window. Once you're in the sniffer window, you choose the channel, you choose the channel width. Once you choose the channel and the channel width, then you click start. You have your user do something. You want to try to get an idea of what's happening on the network when the user is active, or when multiple users are active. Maybe if you're doing testing, maybe you bring along a separate device so you can be the user. Bring along a smartphone or something to go along with your Mac laptop, and then you click stop. And when you click stop, you'll get a capture file in this var temp folder. Now, for me, I use a different application for doing capture. I use an application called AirTool. This is a look at my desktop. AirTool does captures on and leaves those captures on the desktop. AirTool is a completely free application from Adrian Granados. You can go to granados.com and you can download the AirTool application. Completely free application for Mac OS, and it allows you to do a little bit more than the wireless diagnostic tool allows you to do. For example, with AirTool, you can change channels in the middle of a capture. So for example, if your device roams from one access point to another and those two access points are on different channels, you can change the AirTool settings to allow for a capture to, let's say, be on a new channel, capture channel 52 when you used to be capturing channel 40 or something like that. So you can, that allows you to do that. But the idea is once you've finished the capture, once you've stopped the capture, if you're using AirTool, the capture shows up on your desktop. If you're using wireless diagnostics, the capture shows up in the temp folder. But whichever tool it is you're using, once you're done with the capture, then you can use Wireshark to open the capture. Then you can open up Wireshark and open the capture in Wireshark and kind of view what you're looking at. The other little part of that, you're only able to capture on one channel at a time. So you do need to know which channel your device is on. I'll show you real quickly here how I found out which channel my device was on in when I was at the hospital today. There's I was using an iPhone, and let's see here. There we go. There's my iPhone, and the two applications, I know I've mentioned this in other streams, so for those of you that have watched me before, this may seem like a little bit redundant, but the two tools, you can kind of see them there in the upper left of my wireless folder. The two tools that I use to really identify which channel I'm connected to are Net Analyzer and Airport Utility. There's free versions of both of them. I have a paid version of Net Analyzer, but the free version, which is called Net Analyzer Lite, it allows you to see, it allows you to kind of, it helps with this process, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, if I open up Net Analyzer, if you look kind of down at the bottom, hopefully you see that down at the bottom. Down at the bottom, it says Info. There's a bunch of these little tabs down at the bottom. But the one on the left, Info, is the one I want to look at. And right there in Info, it tells me the BSSID. That's right below where it says Copy. That's what I want to look at. I want to find out what my BSSID is. Once I know my BSSID, so in my BSSID is the wireless MAC address of whichever access point you are currently connected with, or with which you are currently connected, if you want to use proper English, proper grammar. Once I find out that the access point with which I am connected, it has a MAC address, has a BSSID ending in 3E74, then I can go to the other application that I use here in Apple iOS on iPhones and iPads. Go to Airport Utility. This is another completely free application. And if you have Wi-Fi scanning enabled for Airport Utility, you see hopefully there in the upper right where it says Wi-Fi scan. If you don't see Wi-Fi scan, then you can just go to the settings on your iPhone. When you go to the settings on your iPhone, you can go down to the Airport Utility settings. There's Airport Utility, and you can see where it says Wi-Fi scanner. So you can turn on the Wi-Fi scanner as long as the Wi-Fi scanner is on. Then when you go to Airport Utility, you'll have the little Wi-Fi scan link up in the upper right. Tap on that little Wi-Fi scan link. Let's do just a little 20-second scan. And when I do this scan, it'll show me all of the access points that my iPhone can see, that my iPhone can hear. And I'll be able to find one of them that has a MAC address ending in 3E74. That 3E74 were the last 4 hexadecimal digits of the BSSID that I'm connected to, that BSSID that I saw in the Net Analyzer application. And you can see it there. It's the second one here. I'll put it up at the top. That's the access point I'm connected with, the MAC address ending in 3E74. And so it tells me which channel that MAC address is on, channel 149. So now I know if I want to do a capture, if I want to do an on-site assessment because, my iPhone in its current state is having a problem, I can do my capture on channel number 149, and then I can open that capture in Wireshark. That's kind of the idea here. So this is my capture from the hospital. In this case, I had already gone in and kind of done my, I had already gone in and checked to see which channel I was currently connected to. I think it was actually channel 149, if I remember correctly from the hospital. Should say it up here. Maybe it's in the radio tap header. It'll tell me which channel that was. Yep, channel 149. I can see it right there. You can see the channel column over on the right-hand side of Wireshark tells me the frequency, the center frequency of the channel. So channel number 149 has a center frequency of 5.745 gigahertz. 5.745 gigahertz is equal to 5,745 megahertz. And when I open up one of these frames, it shows me that's channel 149. When I open up the radio tap header, it shows me channel 149. So now, I've done this capture on channel 149, and what I see is I see a lot of these beacon frames, and so that can be an indicator that this hospital might have some devices, some client devices, where I might not have the ability to really use those client devices for my troubleshooting. Again, if I'm getting back to the process, getting back to the steps, step 1, step 2, steps 3, etc. Step number 1, is the assessment needed? Let's assume the assessment was needed for this hospital. Step number 2, go to the location of the issue. Either you're responding to an existing problem or you're trying to be proactive. Either way, I go to the location of the issue. Let's assume the issue was inside my friend's hospital room where him and his wife are staying, with the newborn baby. Then step number 3 is try to get my hands on a production device if at all possible. But when I look at this hospital's network, it does indicate that there's probably some devices that are in production that I might not have full troubleshooting access to, because a big thing about having a production device is kind of answering the question, can I run a scanner on the production device? That's kind of a big part of it. I want to be able to run some type of scanner software on the production device so that I can get an idea of whether there are, what's in the area and whether there might be interference or something like that in the area. Here's here's a look at what I saw on the hospital network. Let me just adjust it a little bit so that we can kind of see the whole thing. Whoops, went a little bit too high there. But yeah, so this is a look at what I saw on the production network. And it's a lot of wireless access points. I did some kind of erasing of what the MAC addresses are, of what the BSSIDs are for this network here. But I can see it's these are all the access points that at least were kind of bleeding into the area of the hospital where I was doing this little fake assessment here. But yeah, so when I go back and I look at Wireshark, let me get back to Wireshark here. I can see there's an awful lot of these beacon frames. There's an awful lot of these broadcasts that are going across. And so one of the things that I see here is if there's a lot of different networks in a given area, in a hospital or in some other area, a lot of times if there's a lot of different networks, that means that there may be some production devices where I can't load a scanner because I want to be able to run a scanner on the production device. And one thing I can do here in Wireshark is I can kind of filter on all of those broadcasts. If I go into the header here, so what I did is I click on one of these beacon frames. Inside the beacon frame, I can right click and I can do collapse all. You can always see the header by looking at the area that tells you the type of frame. So where it says beacon frame, that's the header. Where it says request to send, that's the header. Where it says action, that's the header. So wherever it says the type of frame, that's the header. So I click on one of these beacon frames, I click the header, and when I open up the header, it tells me the type of frame up here. And what I can do is I can apply that as a filter. I can right click where it says beacon frame, do apply as filter, do selected. Notice up here in the little filter text box, now it creates a ready-made filter for me. This is the filter to isolate beacon frames only. WLAN.fc.type_subtype equals followed by 0x8. That will filter on beacon frames only. And if you're ever, kind of wondering, well, how am I gonna do this? How am I gonna do this filter if I don't have the frame in front of me or what have you? Give me just a moment here, and I'll show you. Let me bring that down. Whoops, got to also bring down the hospital scan a little bit. There we go. If you're on a Mac, here, let me run Wireshark so that, whoops, there we go. Not exactly sure why I'm not seeing that. Sorry about that. I thought I would be able to move Wireshark over so that I could see it, but I don't know. I guess I'm not able to do that. Perhaps it's because I'm sharing it. But in any case, up at the top of the screen, you can go to this expression window. You'll have the option to open up a little window called the expression window. And when you go to the expressions, then you'll have the ability to choose kind of what you want to filter on, what you want to select. Older versions of Wireshark used to have a little expression button that you could click, but the current version does not have a little expression button there. Maybe is it down here? No, that's just the capture properties. But yeah, there used to be a little expression button up at the top, but there no longer is an expression button. So be it. Whoops, didn't want to do that. Now I gotta scroll back to the right and there we go. That's a little bit better. So yeah, so now I have these I have this filter expression. I have this I'm filtering only on the beacon frames, and when I look at these beacon frames, I can see that there are a number of different network names, that there are a number of different SSIDs. I can see that by clicking on a beacon frame, right-clicking, and doing the old collapse all, and then the frame body is always going to be below the header. So remember, the header was the name of the frame, was the frame type. So beacon frame, the frame body is right below the header. So when I open up the frame body, the SSID happens to be one of the tagged parameters. Technical name for tag parameter is information element. And there I see the SSID. If I right-click on this SSID, I can apply as a column. And unfortunately, it looks like my right clicks aren't showing up there. But if you are a Wireshark user, you'll be able to see that. But if I right-click on this SSID here, there's a little apply as column option. And yeah, unfortunately, for some reason, I'm not able to share Wireshark, get Wireshark on the other screen, the screen that I'm able to kind of look at the full view. So I'll have to figure that out on Twitch, see exactly what I'm doing wrong that's not allowing that to happen. But the bottom line is I create this little column here, kind of scroll to look at the column. Let's just get rid of the channel column. That'll make it easier. So yeah, I can now see that there's a number of different SSIDs that are coming from this network. So I see there's CSINTMO, CSHS Private, CS Clinical, CS Guest, CSHS Private 0A. There's a hidden network of some kind. Let's see, any others? CS Vo-Fi. So there's a number of different Wi-Fi networks that are coming from each of these access points in this environment. And usually when you see a lot of different SSIDs, I would say especially in an area like a hospital, usually that means that you're going to have some production devices where you don't have the ability to install scanner software. You can install scanner software. There is free scanner software. Here, I'll put it in the old chat area on Twitch here. I mean, there is free scanner software for every major operating system, for Mac OS, for Windows, For Apple iOS, for Android, there's free scanner software for all of those. So if you have a device that runs one of those, and if you have the ability to install applications on any of those, then you have the ability to kind of do that third step that I was talking about. You know, step one, figure out if it's necessary. Step two, go to the location of the issue or the location where you're trying to do preventative assessments. Step three, try to get your hands on a production device. You know, there's free scanner software for all. So if your production device runs one of those operating systems, then that that allows you to kind of run some type of software. For those that may not be familiar, for Mac OS, you don't even need separate software. What I recommend is the application called Wi-Fi Explorer Pro, or even non-pro, you know, the lower cost version of Wi-Fi Explorer. However, if for whatever reason you don't have the budget, I mean, the non-pro version is only $15 US, but if you don't have the budget, if you really need a completely free option, then for Mac OS you can also use the wireless diagnostics. And the wireless diagnostics is part of the operating system. You do have to go to the scan window in wireless diagnostics, but that is part of the Mac OS operating system. If you're using Windows, a tool I like to use is Acrylic Wi-Fi. There is a free version. It's very similar to Wi-Fi Explorer Pro, where I would recommend taking a look at one of the paid versions. I forget exactly what. Let's see here if I can find real quickly what that is and share that with you here. But yeah, I would definitely recommend checking out one of the paid versions here. Give me just a moment to bring this up on screen. Now, what is going on here? Oh. I know what might be happening. That's what happened. Okay, now I know why we were having some issues there. Where's my acrylic Wi-Fi? So yeah, here's a look at acrylic Wi-Fi. Whoops, made the window a little bit too wide. Got to make that a little bit smaller. But yeah, here's a look at acrylic Wi-Fi. Definitely an application that I like for Windows quite a bit. And I forget the name of it. But, well, it's Acrylic Wi-Fi Pro. There you go. So this Acrylic Wi-Fi Home is free. It'll do the trick in a lot of areas for what you need to do. But I really like the professional version. So the professional version allows you to do things like give aliases to your access points when you're doing these assessments. That can make the assessment process a little bit simpler. And yeah, you know, it's very similar to the way the Wi-Fi Explorer application for Macs allow you to give aliases. You know, here's the Wi-Fi Explorer for Macs. And yeah, so if I, you know, I under this annotations, you may have noticed this from before, I'm able to give a little name to my access point, Ben AP1, let's say. And that can make things a little bit, you can use spreadsheets. You can import a bunch of annotations via spreadsheet. So if you have hundreds or thousands of access points that you have to troubleshoot at a given site, if you can export a CSV file that includes the access point's BSSID along with whatever alias you want to give the access point, you know, if you have a name for your access point, then you have the ability to kind of put that into Acrylic Wi-Fi Pro or Wi-Fi Explorer Pro. For those of you that are looking for something for mobile devices, for Apple iOS, I already kind of showed you that one, the combination of Network Analyzer along with Airport Utility. That's kind of the combo, at least that I recommend using. Those are both, there's a free version of Network Analyzer. There's also a paid version of Network Analyzer. Airport Utility is completely free. And then for Android, the tool that I like is Aruba Utilities. But also, whoops, I misspelled Android here. Sorry about that. There's also a tool that's called Wi-Fi Analyzer from the developer named Farproc that I would say is also a pretty good tool. The Aruba Utilities allows you to also kind of integrate with an Aruba infrastructure. And so especially if you're using an Aruba infrastructure, I would recommend using Aruba Utilities. But even if you're not using an Aruba infrastructure, honestly, the look of the Aruba Utilities and some of the things that the Aruba Utilities can do, in my opinion, makes it a little bit more useful than, let's just get rid of wireless diagnostics here. Makes it maybe a little bit more useful than makes it a little bit more useful than Wi-Fi Analyzer. Just kind of a personal preference of mine. So the bottom line here is, again, I know I'm kind of maybe meandering a little bit, but step one, determine if you need to do an assessment. Hopefully you don't. Hopefully you can look at floor plans, talk to the user, look at your monitoring or management tools, your consoles they're kind of centrally accessible, that you can look at your desk or you can look at from the data center. Look at that information, determine what the issue might be, or at least get a good idea of what the issue might be, and solve the issue without having to go on site. But if you do have to go on site, if you do have to perform some type of assessment or some type of adjustment, then after step one, after you determine whether the adjustment or the assessment is needed, step two, get to the location of the issue. You do want to do this from the location of the issue. You want to try to avoid doing things like saying, well, this classroom at this middle school is kind of busy right now, so I'd rather not have to go inside the classroom. I'd rather stay in the hallway. I would say if you can, you want to try to get in touch with the teacher and say, hey, what would be a good hour where I can come by and just hopefully sit in the back of your class, hopefully not disrupt things too much, but be in the class while class is going on if I can, to try to go through and figure out why you might be having problems with the Wi-Fi here. So try to get on location as close as you can. Try to get access to a production device. High school might be using iPads, might be using whatever Windows devices, might be using Mac laptops, whatever it is, Windows laptops. Chromebooks are a little bit trickier. There's just not as many Chromebook devices out there that Chromebook tools out there, I should say, that allow you to really do an assessment with a Chromebook tool. But yeah, that's kind of where you are. So I've determined the assessment is needed. I've gone to the location. I'm on a production device again with this hospital that I was at earlier. Quite possible there's going to be some production devices I can't use. Who knows? Maybe this WiFi network has some type of voice over Wi-Fi handset that is not Android, that is not Mac OS, and therefore I won't be able to install a tool. Maybe this clinical network or this private network has some iPads connected or some Windows tablets connected or something like that. Maybe those devices are kind of locked down. So maybe I don't have the ability to install the airport utility for Apple iOS or install acrylic Wi-Fi for Windows. I know there's other, I don't want to act like acrylic's the only Wi-Fi scanner. I know there's other Wi-Fi scanners out there. Acrylic just happens to be one that I like. So you kind of go to these, you may not have the ability to get a production tool, but then if we assume that you can, or even if you can't, even if you say to yourself, well, unfortunately, it looks like I'm not really going to be able to get a production device here. Man, what the heck happened? I kind of lost. Oh, I know why. Sorry, give me just a moment, folks. I lost my little whiteboard here for a second, but I'll get that brought up. So then once you have determined whether you can get access to a a tool or not, a production device or not, then I would say your next step would be try to do some type of Wi-Fi scan of the area. And let's see here. Am I getting my whiteboard back? Hopefully, maybe. We shall see. If it is coming back, it's coming back very slowly. Let's see here. Yeah, it looks like I might not be getting it back for some reason. Give me just a moment here to see if it is possible to get my whiteboard back. Otherwise, might have to go whiteboardless for the moment if it's just not happening. Yeah, unfortunately, it looks like I may not be getting it. Darn it. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what happened there, but I don't want to reboot in the middle of the stream, so I don't want to kind of go through that. But in the absence of a whiteboard, I can still at least put the steps in the chat area, although that might not be as ideal for those of you that watch this on replay. So I might have to split this into two parts to be able to do a little... where are you? Okay, there we go. Okay, sorry about the little delay there, but now my whiteboard is back. So again... Step one was, is the assessment needed? Hopefully the answer is no, but perhaps the answer is yes. Step number two, go to the location where it is, where the issue is happening. And a big reason why you want to be precise about the location is you want to be as precise as possible about potential interference issues, whether it's interference from a neighboring Wi-Fi network, interference from your own Wi-Fi access points, kind of interfering with each other, interference from a non-Wi-Fi device. In a hospital, it might be a telemetry system of some type. We had issues when I was working at USC where there was interference from some point-to-point wireless links. We had some point-to-point wireless links at one of the remote sites to keep those remote sites up and running with internet access. We didn't have the ability to really get a high-speed wired internet connection to some of the areas where USC has remote sites. So there's a wireless point-to-point link to the remote site, but the wireless point-to-point link was using channels that our Wi-Fi infrastructure was using. So it was kind of a non-Wi-Fi link, but something that would still cause... whoops, did I... There we go. So you want to go to the location, because, you know, different interference sources may look differently at different locations. So you want to be as precise as possible with your location. You want to get your hands on a production device, if at all possible. If you can, so this is if possible, you want to get your hands on a production device. Whoops, and I just realized that I made a little mistake here. Sorry, I gotta go back real quickly. So step one, is it needed? Step two, get to the location of the problem or the location where you're doing your preventative assessment. Step number three, get your hands on a production device, if possible. Some type of device that real users are using, again, if possible. Step number four, what I would typically recommend is do some type of Wi-Fi scan of the area. And when I say a Wi-Fi scan, what you're looking for in the Wi-Fi scan is you're looking for access points, You're looking for the channel that those access points are on, along with the width of the channel. You are looking for the RSSI. RSSI is signal strength. And then I know my beloved Twitter friends love it when I talk about this, but you also want to look at the data rates that the device is using, because, and here's the part they especially love, depending on the data rates that your access points are using, you could potentially have a ghost frames issue, which would make it so that when you do your Wi-Fi scan, the Wi-Fi environment looks clean, but actually is suffering from some level of interference. That's kind of the idea there. The basic idea with the data rates is, if your data rate, and specifically what we're talking about is your minimum basic rate or your beacon rate. If your minimum basic rate or your beacon rate, if it is 6 megabits per second, then, you know, sort of the scan is real. And I'm going to put real in quotes. So what I mean by the scan is real, meaning that if you see an access point in your scan that looks like it could be interfering, then you can be pretty sure that there's interference. But more importantly, if you see that there's not any access points in your scan that appear that they could be interfering, then you can be relatively confident that you're not getting interference from any of your nearby access points. If the minimum basic rate or the beacon rate is above 6 megabits per second, is greater than 6 megabits per second, then you might have interference even if you can't see it. Might have interference even if you can't see it. You don't. And I'll show you what I'm talking about when I get to the when I get back into the tools, the scanner tool and Wireshark. I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about when I say it. So, you know, that's what you're looking for in a Wi-Fi scan. So you can use one of those scanner tools that I just described. Hopefully you can run it on a production device. So if you're trying to support Mac laptops, hopefully you can run Wi-Fi Explorer, or you can run the wireless diagnostics tool on one of the Mac devices that's being used, or at least on a Mac device that's similar to one of the ones being used. If you're supporting Windows devices, you can use acrylic Wi-Fi or one of the other Windows scanners. If you're supporting iPhones, you can run the airport utility and potentially also run that network analyzer tool. So the bottom line is, you run one of these scanner tools, and what you're looking for is how many access points are reaching the area, which channels and which channel width are these access points using, how strong is the signal strength from these access points, and then you also want to get an idea, what's the minimum basic rate or what's the beacon rate that these access points are using. If the access points are using the minimum basic rate of 6 megabits per second, then you kind of know that the scan is real. If I see something, it could be causing interference. If I don't see anything, I have a pretty good idea that there's not a big interference problem in this area. If your minimum basic rate is below 6 megabits per second, then you just want to keep in mind, hey, I might still have an interference problem even though I don't see one. Even if I don't see an interference problem, I might still have one. And so the idea there is to, you know, do this Wi-Fi scan as kind of your next step of the assessment to try to figure out if you have some type of Wi-Fi issue in the area. If you do the Wi-Fi scan and what I guess I should say actually is, if you need to do the Wi-Fi scan over a large range of locations. So the idea is, maybe you have this auditorium where there's going to be some type of big event, the auditorium hasn't been used in a while, or perhaps when it has been used, there wasn't as much Wi-Fi activity, or when it has been used, you received complaints about the Wi-Fi. If you want to go in and do some type of kind of preventative Wi-Fi scanning or anything like that, you may say to yourself, well, I don't want to just go in the auditorium, scan one seat out of 500 seats in the auditorium, and then assume that the Wi-Fi is good or bad throughout the auditorium based on that one seat. So you may want to scan a number of locations. If you have to scan a wide variety of locations, you may want to use some type of site survey software, some type of site survey application. Something like Ekahau Site Survey. Ekahau is definitely the industry leader in site survey applications. There are other site survey applications. Air Magnet Survey from NetAlly is another one. IB Wave is another one. There's some other options out there, but Ekahau is definitely the most popular of the site survey applications. And what those applications allow you to do is upload a floor plan and kind of scan multiple locations, go to multiple different locations to do Wi-Fi scans so that you can all read them in one place. You can look at kind of a color-coded heat map. You can mouse over different areas to see which access points are visible at which area and what channel those APs were on and what signal strength those APs were showing in different areas. So you can do that. The limitation of some of these site survey applications is they may not run on the device that you're trying to support. It's like, if I'm trying to support iPads, Ekahau's fantastic. I can run Ekahau on an iPad. I can record information. I mean, you may not be able to record information from the iPad's internal radio, but you can use the iPad while you're doing Ekahau. You can add little screenshots to Ekahau taken from the iPad. So you can kind of get iPad information and add it to your Ekahau floor plans. If you're running a Mac, if you're running Windows, you can use, you may be able to use the internal adapter of the Mac device or of the Windows device and put some of that information into Ekahau. If you're trying to support a bunch of Android phones, or if you're trying to support a bunch of iPhones, then you may be a little bit more limited. You may not be able to get signal strength information, access point information that comes from the iPhone or comes from the Android device and get that onto a floor plan that you have in Ekahau or in some other survey tool. So if you have a wider area that you're trying to do an assessment of, or if you're trying to do some type of preventative work, some type of preventative assessment, these site survey applications can absolutely be very, very useful, but there may be limitations in terms of which devices you can run them on. So in any case, you want to kind of do this Wi-Fi scan, and I'll tell you, usually, let's say somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't know, hopefully somewhere around 90% of the time, 90+% of the time, 90+% of the time, the Wi-Fi scan is going to give you the information that you need to identify the issue. You'll be able to look at the Wi-Fi scan. You'll be able to see we have some low signal areas. We have some areas where there's significant interference. You'll be able to get an idea of what adjustments you want to make to your infrastructure. You might say, maybe we need to change the configuration of our infrastructure. Maybe we need to use a different transmit power. Maybe we need to adjust how the channels are allocated. Maybe we need to use a wider or a narrower channel width. You might be able to make the adjustments just based on what you see in the Wi-Fi scan. I would say that's typically the way it is at least 90% of the time. Is, even if you get to this step, even if, you say, well, this is definitely needed, so now I have to go and I got to get to the location, hopefully find a production device, do a Wi-Fi scan using that production device if at all possible. I would say 90+% of the time, you're going to be able to identify the issue just by looking at the Wi-Fi scan. You'll be able to say, here's kind of what the issue is. I would say that in general, that's probably an accurate depiction of the way things were at the hospital I was at. And look, you know, when I look at this hospital network, I know that there may be a possibility that I kind of come across a little bit paternalistic, as they say, or like a little bit of a know-it-all or something like that. I don't mean to say that, like, oh, you know, these are issues that you can easily solve, this and that. You know, look, when it comes to any kind of network setup, there's going to be, you know, work that you have to do with organizational leadership, work that you have to do with the networking and with the security teams, work that you do with your vendor. If you have a reseller, a VAR, work that you do with the reseller to kind of determine where you're going to install access points, what the settings on those access points are going to be, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, I don't want to kind of say, well, you know, I was in the hospital hanging out with my pal, you know, meeting the new baby, and, you know, spent less than a half an hour looking at things on my laptop using a Wi-Fi scanner or using a tool like Wireshark. And I was, you know, within that short period of time, I was able to figure out exactly what's going on with this network and how it can be improved or anything like that. So I hope it doesn't kind of come off like that. I'm just saying, you know, if this is your own network, these are just some things that you can look at. They may not exactly apply to you. They may apply to you. They may not exactly apply to you, though. You know, they're things that could potentially be of use. But yeah, so like this is one of those cases where in looking at the Wi-Fi scan, there's an excellent chance that this hospital's Wi-Fi network could be improved without ever having to proceed to the next step. This is probably one of those 90% cases. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have the foresight to get a screenshot, but one of the things I noticed at the hospital is just there's a lot of networks. Now that may be something that the wireless folks do not have the ability to fix. As a wireless person, you may go into the hospital and you may want to be able to say, well, look, we have a guest network. You know, and look, what I'll do is I'll just restrict myself to access points that have the MAC address ending with an F. Like you see the FA, the FF, the F7, the F6. That's a good indication that's all one physical access point. And these are all networks coming from that same physical access point. So, you know, if I look at my screen here, we have FA, which is a guest network. We have this private network, so that's 2 networks. Vo-Fi makes it 3 networks. Private with a 0A makes it 4 networks. INTMO makes it 5 networks. Clinical makes it 6 networks. A hidden network makes it 7 networks. Any others that I might have missed there? I think I already did guest. I think guest was the first one that I did. Maybe. Yeah, I think I did guest. So 7 networks. So it looks like there's 7 networks being used. Again, I didn't have the foresight to get that in my Wi-Fi scan. Here's a screenshot of the Wi-Fi scan. What I actually did was I messed up. I forgot to stop the scan. So when I got home, unfortunately, Wi-Fi Explorer scanned, and then I lost the scan from the hospital. I forgot to stop the scan at the end of being at the hospital. That's a rookie mistake. Always stop your scan when you're finished scanning at a given location, so that way you can, if you might have missed something, if you want to be able to look back at what was scanned at the previous location, you have the ability to actually use the scanner tool and go through and get a little bit more detail. That's what I was planning to do here, was to show you the 7 different networks that were at the hospital. But luckily, that's something that we can see in Wireshark. So I see 7 networks. That's already one thing. Maybe there's a possibility that you could have fewer than 7 networks. Is it possible that the 2 private networks could be combined into one? Could the Vo-Fi devices be put on some other network, you know, with non-Vo-Fi devices? The hidden network. What's the purpose of the hidden network? Maybe what you're trying to do over the hidden network could be done over the clinical network, or over the private network, or over the private 0A network. And I'll bring back up those networks so that you can look at them to see them again. The INTMO network, INTMO network. Whatever that network's used for. And I want to make sure that was one of the ones that had an F. Maybe that was, there it is, F6. So yeah, with the INTMO network, maybe whatever's done over that network could be combined with the hidden network, or with the private network, or with private 0A, or maybe the voice, or maybe the clinical. So that'd be one thing that could probably improve Wi-Fi performance. Because look, I guess I kind of buried the lead here, but when I was in the hospital, I would not call this a world-class Wi-Fi network. This is a world-class hospital, okay? This is, I would definitely say, the #1 hospital in Los Angeles. Obviously, Los Angeles is a big place, so we have some very, very nice health facilities here. I think it's a fair assessment to say that this is considered the best hospital in Los Angeles, certainly in the city of Los Angeles. It's a high-profile hospital. I'm sure you've heard of celebrities being taken to this hospital when events happen, let's just say, where celebrities need some kind of medical care. So it's a first-class hospital. There's no doubt about it. But I would say the Wi-Fi was not exactly first class. Not that I ever had a total outage, but definitely my Twitter page was a little bit slow to load. My browsing experience was a little bit slow. I didn't do a speed test at all, but it was definitely a slower experience than I expected in the hospital. And I wouldn't say that it was terribly busy, at least from what I could tell. It didn't look like, in the area that I was at, that there were a huge number of people in the hospital. So I was expecting, like, first-class hospital, not that many folks there. I'm going to have like a blazing fast Wi-Fi experience, or at least a Wi-Fi experience that's approximately equal to what I would have if I was connected to a cellular network. This Wi-Fi was slower than the cellular. Like, if I didn't work in Wi-Fi, I wouldn't have even used the Wi-Fi network. I would have just used the cellular connection on my smartphone and had a little bit of a faster experience there. So, I think one of the reasons why they might have had a little bit of a slower network is because of these 7 different networks they're using. And that's something that I can identify without ever having to go beyond the Wi-Fi scanner. I can see that in the Wi-Fi scanner. Another thing that I can see in some Wi-Fi scanners, so not all Wi-Fi scanners show this, but some do, is the beacon rate. Hopefully you can see that there, third column from the right, the rate that shows up there. It shows the beacon rate of 12. And as I kind of mentioned earlier on, if the beacon rate is above 6, then that means that you might not be seeing all the interference there. So it's like, when I looked at my scanner, here's what I saw. I saw all of these networks here. I happen to be connected on channel number 149. And so I see 1 network, 2 networks, 3 networks, 4 networks. Let me see if there's any others. Yeah, so 4 networks on channel number 149. There's at least 4 networks on channel number 149 that could be interfering with each other, or could be kind of sharing bandwidth and thus slowing things down. Because of the fact that that minimum, that beacon rate is 12, again, the rate that we're seeing with all these beacon frames, you look under info, you see there's beacon frames, you look third column to the right, you see the rate's 12. Because the rate is 12, there might be more than 4. There could be 10. There could be way more than 4 access points that are all potentially sharing the channel, all potentially interfering with one another. And it's possible that I just don't see them because my beacon rate is above 6. Now, I'm not saying you always have to keep the beacon rate at 6. I'm just saying if you're doing an assessment, try to make sure your beacon rate is 6 so that you can see the interference, so that you're not missing something that may actually be, you're not seeing like an environment that looks kind of clean but actually has a lot of interference. So there's a minimum of 4, There might be way more than 4. There might be 6, 7, 8, 10, 12. There might be a lot more than 4 networks. We just don't know because the beacon rate is above 6. But there's at least 4 networks. And remember, each of these access points is times 7. Each of these access points is times 7. So there are at least 28 different networks that are all operating on channel 149. 4 access points times 7 networks per access point. There might be more than 28. There might be 10 or 12 networks that are all interfering with one another, but we can only see 4 of them because the beacon rate is higher than 6. So it might be 10 times 7. It might be 12 times 7. It might only be 4 times 7. We just don't know that yet. But yeah, the point is there are a lot of networks operating on the same channel. And so that right there kind of gives me an indication of the issue that I might be having here. The issue that I might be having here, it's a little bit tough to say for sure, is that there just might be too many networks on channel 149. There might be so much overhead from these beacons and from the non-data traffic that's going across channel 149 that it's slowing down my data access. The reason why my Wi-Fi network at this hospital was slower than my cellular network might just be the fact that there's all of this beacon traffic and all of this other non-data traffic on the network. That could definitely be an issue there. And it's a little bit tough to pin it on that. I don't want to exactly say that that's the issue. I would say, look, it is a general rule, if you're using the 6 megabits per second beacon rate, if you're using the 6 megabits per second beacon rate, and if you have 3 SSIDs, so obviously this has 7 SSIDs, but whoops, if you have 3 SSIDs, that's going to be approximately 1.8% of your channel time gets taken up by this beacon traffic. So if you have the 6 megabit per second beacon rate, if you have 3 SSIDs that you're using, 3 networks that you're using, about 1.8% of your channel time is going to be taken up by the beacon rate. If you have want to make sure I have this correct, I believe it is 12 megabit per second beacon rate. And if you have 3 SSIDs, it's not going to be exactly half. It's going to be somewhere around 1%. About 1% of your channel time is taken up by the beacon rate. And the reason why it's not exactly half, even though the speed is doubled for the beacons, you don't save double the bandwidth because the physical layer header in Wi-Fi, we've talked about this before on the stream a few different times, the physical layer header in Wi-Fi is always 6 megabits per second. No matter what, the physical layer header is 6 megabits per second. So even if the beacon rate is 12, the physical layer header is still going to be 6. So that's why it's not exactly half. That's why it's kind of close to half, 1 to 1.8. But that's the amount of channel time you're losing. So, if you do the math on this, you say, well, here's a total of 3 SSIDs. And in this case, I have a minimum of 28 SSIDs. 28 is approximately 9 times 3. 3 times 9 is 27. So it's approximately 9 times 3. So I'm going to have approximately 9% of my channel time used up by beacons. But again, we are not able to see the full picture. We think that we only have these 4 access points that are on channel 149, but maybe there's more. In cases when for example, some work I did for USC, some work I did for let's just call him high-profile client in the financial world. I really can't talk too much about it because when I did the work for him, they didn't want me to talk about the company publicly. B, the owner of this company is a very, very high-profile person, and So I can't really get into that too much, unfortunately. But it was office space. That's what I was doing the work for there. Big open office space, and you know, making a jump from 4 access points seen up to 10 or 12 access points seen is not unusual. You know, and I know that may seem a bit ridiculous, but remember, Wi-Fi broadcasts out in 3 dimensions. You know, if I bring back the whiteboard here real quickly, I'll try to talk about, because I know it may seem like I'm going through a bit of an exaggeration. Gosh, you know, you see 4 networks, and now I'm trying to say, oh, there might be as many as 12 networks that are broadcasting. I know that the natural reaction to that may be, oh, well, that's a bit extreme. How could there be so many? It's like, if I have this big area and I have an absolute ton of access points, you know, just many, many access points. Again, you know, maybe this is tens of thousands of square feet. So, you know, if you can imagine, this is a very, very large area with a very, very large number of access points here. If I am looking at a client device, so I have my little client device here in a given location, and my client device is on channel number 149. When I'm using the 6 megabits per second beacon rate, so let's say this is the access point that my client device is connected to. When I'm using the 6 megabits per second beacon rate, my access point may go a certain distance. When I'm using the 12 megabits per second beacon rate, so that was the orange there is meant to be the 6. When I'm using the 12 megabits per second beacon rate, my, you know, the distance where my access point goes may be a lot lower. And so the key here is, if you consider the fact that this is kind of a 3-dimensional thing, that the radio waves are propagating out in 3 dimensions, even though you say, well, okay, there's 4 access points that are channel 149. Let's say this guy right here that I'm connected to is channel 149. Let's say this guy is channel 149. Let's say, I don't know, this guy is channel 149. And let's say this guy is channel 149. Maybe those are the 4 access points that are able to reach my little client device with the 12 megabit per second beacon speed, the beacon rate. Maybe those are the ones that have the radius that can kind of reach it. You know, this guy's radius reaches it. 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 You know, so there's only 4 that reach it. But, you know, and if we kind of expand this out here to show more access point locations, even though it may not seem like that big of a difference going from 12 megabits per second to 6 megabits per second, kind of giving these access points each a little bit of extra range, you know, in every direction, having a little bit more range than they did before, it can really add up the number of extra access points that are able to reach a given client device. You may have an extra access point there, an extra access point from that direction, an extra access point from that direction, an extra access point from another direction, an extra access point from the floor above, from the floor below. You may have a large number of extra access points that are able to reach this client device, even just with this relatively small jump from 12 to, even with this relatively small jump in range, from going from the 12 megabits per second range to the 6 megabits per second range, because it's a 3-dimensional thing, because your client device is hearing access points from in front of the client, behind the client, to the right of the client, to the left of the client, above, below, every 3-dimensional direction. Because the client is hearing from all those directions, it may truly be, well, with the lower rate, I can only see 4 of them in my scanner. But with the 6 megabit per second rate, with the rate that shows true interference, maybe I do see 12 of them in my area. That is a possibility, just because of kind of the 3-dimensional nature of how devices listen and what can interfere with devices. And so if I kind of get back here to what I was looking at before, get back to the Wireshark capture, get back to the scan, when I look at the scan here, so I'm saying if I may have about 9% channel overhead if I have 7 SSIDs like I do here, 7 different networks here, and if I see 4 networks that are using my channel number 149, but let's just say it's 10. If there are in actuality 10 access points that are within range, if you're using the 6 megabit per second SSID, 10 times 7 is 70. 70 divided by 3 is a number that I don't remember off the top of my head. It's about 23. It's about 23. So that means you're going to be having about 23% of your bandwidth sucked up just by these beacon frames. Even though the beacon frames don't show, they can still be eating up your wireless bandwidth. And so that might have been one of the problems at the hospital. The problem at the hospital might have been that 23% of my bandwidth is being eaten up by these beacons, and that's why the Wi-Fi network was a little bit on the slow side. It could be other things as well. It could have been the location of the access points. Maybe there are access points that aren't located close to the area where I'm located. So that also could have been an issue of some kind. It also could have been that these access points might have been using a transmit power that was a little bit on the low side. I did not see any information about the transmit power here. I'll share Wireshark with you so that I can kind of go on this journey with you, so to speak. So there's my Wireshark capture, and let me bring up the, here we'll choose this guest network. And so, yeah, if I look inside the beacon may tell you which power level it's using. Actually, it looks like this might be telling me. That's the only thing I don't know. I don't know if this is the current power level or if this is the maximum power level. So if this is the current power level, 17 dBm would be kind of on the upper edge of what you would usually want to do in an enterprise. The number that I like to go between is about 12 and 17. 12 might be the lower, 17 might be the upper. I realize you can probably go a little bit beyond that and still be okay. You can probably go a little bit below 12, probably go a bit above 17 and still be okay. But with most Wi-Fi client devices, most modern client devices, I find that 12 to 17 is a pretty good range. So if in fact these access points are using the 17 dBm power level, and I just don't know for sure that that's the case. I wasn't in front of the configuration interface to know that for sure. I can see here, I believe it's under QBSS load, or I may be wrong about that. Maybe it wasn't under QBSS load. I thought there was some area that would tell me the minimum and the maximum, but maybe I am wrong about that. Was it under one of these arrow nets? I might be totally incorrect about that. I thought, and it might have been just a different network that had that information. Let's see here. So I clicked on the WiFi network just to see if there was anything a little bit different. I don't see anything that's showing like a maximum or a minimum level. So let's assume 17 dBm is the transmit power level. In this environment, seeing what I'm seeing here, where there's at least 4 access points that are using the same channel, because of the fact that the 12 megabit per second rate is being used. You can see it there, the third column from the right, the 12 megabit per second rate is being used. So there might be even more than 4 access points, all kind of using channel 149 and occupying channel 149 in the location where I was at in the hospital. Because of that, that might mean that maybe I want to lower my transmit power. I would say that's a little bit unusual for modern Wi-Fi networks. I run into a lot more networks nowadays where it would be recommended to raise the power rather than lower it. But this might be one of those cases. This might be one of those cases where one potential fix or one potential thing that could help would be lowering the transmit power. So, that might be something that would help. Another thing that I definitely noticed is I'm looking at the channels that are being used by the access points in this area, and at least in the area where I was in the hospital, it seems to indicate that not all of the 5 gigahertz channels are being used. I'm seeing channel 36, channel 40, channel 44. I don't even see channel 48, channel 149, 150. I don't even see 153, 157, 161. So I see 6 different channels being used, but in the 5 gigahertz band, and you know, that's what we get with channels number 36 to 165. 36 to 165. Those are all channel numbers in the 5 gigahertz band. So that's 5 gigahertz. So those are all channels in the 5 gigahertz frequency band. In this range between 36 and 165, I am only seeing 6 different channels available. And look, again, I'm not in front of the configuration interface for this hospital's environment, but that means one of 2 things. One, it might mean that the configuration of the access points of the controller that manages the access points isn't allowing enough channels. Maybe there's only 6 channels allowed. And then number 2, what it could mean is maybe the automatic channel selection protocol. You know, this is a Cisco environment. You could see there Cisco written all over the place. Cisco uses a protocol called Radio Resource Management, RRM. Maybe for whatever reason in this hospital, the RRM protocol is not selecting the channels in an optimal way. So those are 2 real possibilities. So one thing that could be an issue is the transmit power may be too high. That may be making it so that we have too many access points here. I'll use a different color. Too many access points here on channel 149, all hitting my laptop, all hitting my smartphone, potentially eating up too much of the bandwidth. At least 9% of the bandwidth is being eaten up just by beacon traffic, just by general access point overhead. If there's 10 APs in the area, which is certainly possible because we don't have the 6 megabit per second beacon rate enabled. If there's 10 APs in the area, that would be 23% being eaten up. But whatever the number is, 9%, 23%, somewhere in between 9 and 23%, that's one issue. So maybe lowering the AP transmit power could help. Another thing that could help is either A, enabling more channels. You know, again, we only have 6 different channels to choose from here. You know, one of them is channel 149, one of them is 44, one of them is 63, one of them is 157, one of them is 56, and one of them is, or actually we already did, or are there only 5 channels that we're using here? Oh, there it is. Channel number 40, missed that one. So there's only 6 channels that we have available. If I'm only allowing 6 channels to be used, maybe I'd want to look at my configuration and allow more channels. Got to make sure your devices support the extra channels, but modern devices typically support 25 channels in the 5 gigahertz band. Typically, you'll get 25 channels supported. Even if they don't support all 25, modern devices typically support a lot more than 6. So you could definitely, you know, perhaps use more than 6 channels if that's the config. Or perhaps this hospital is already using more than 6 channels, and maybe there are some tweaks that need to be made to the RRM settings. Sometimes you need to massage those settings or kind of push RRM in one direction or another to make it so that all of your channels get used. Make it so that you don't have the situation that we have where there are at least 4 access points operating on the same channel, maybe even more than 4 access points operating on the same channel. And again, all of this is information that I'm able to see just from the Wi-Fi scanner. I realize I don't have the scanner actively running. I'm just showing you a screenshot from the scanner. But just from the scanner running, I could see that there were 7 SSIDs. Again, I don't have a screenshot of that, but I was able to show you that in Wireshark. We saw the 7 SSIDs. You know, if you look at the SSID column on the right, you see all those different SSIDs. See the hidden network there as well. So I can see that just from my Wi-Fi scanner that there are 7 different networks. I can see from my Wi-Fi scanner that the beacon rate is 12 megabits per second. Not every Wi-Fi scanner shows the beacon rate, but this is a screenshot from Wi-Fi Explorer for Mac. Wi-Fi Explorer does show you the beacon rate. I'll show you again my Wi-Fi Explorer. Just give me a minute there to bring that back up. Actually, you know what? I don't think I have it currently up, so let me bring that back up. So yeah, there's Wi-Fi Explorer, and you know, I can see the beacon rate in Wi-Fi Explorer. Hopefully you see it right there. Supported rates 6 with a B. So the lowest rate with a B in Wi-Fi Explorer, that's the rate that beacons are going to use. B stands for basic. So the minimum basic rate, or MBR, M is in man, BR. The MBR, or the minimum basic rate, is the rate that beacon frames are going to use. And so 6 megabits per second is the rate that that this access point is using here, that my access point is using. So that's something that you can see in your scan. So I can see the minimum basic rate. I can see the number of SSIDs that are being used by a given access point. Whoops. I can see the number of SSIDs that are being used by an access point. I can see what channels are being used. I can see the fact that there were only these 6 channels being used here. Only 149, 44, 161, channel 40, 157, and channel 36. I can see that only those channels are being used. Give me just a moment. I had a little issue there. There we go. So I can see that only those channels are being used. That's another thing that that I can identify from this scanner. And then inside the scan, I can also see the transmit power. I realize I showed you the transmit power in Wireshark, but again, the Wi-Fi Explorer application does show you all of the same beacon information that I was looking at in Wireshark. So if it's in the beacon, just like I was looking at the beacon in Wireshark, I can look at this advanced details screen. Hopefully you can see that kind of in the middle. Here's network details. Here's advanced details. I can look at that advanced details, and I might be able to see which transmit power my access points are using. So I haven't had to go beyond the Wi-Fi scanner, and I already get a pretty good idea that, number one, I could probably use a lower transmit power if I'm using 17 dBm as my transmit power. Again, the range of 12 on the bottom, 17 on the top, that's kind of the range that I would recommend. So if you're up at the top and you're seeing a lot of interference here, then you can kind of maybe drop it down to 14, 15, 13, 12, something a little bit below 17 dBm. That might help things a little bit. You might be able to use the more channels, more than just 6 channels, or if you are using more than 6 channels, you might be able to adjust those RRM settings so that more channels get used. You know, I don't want to make it seem like it's kind of all negative stuff. One thing I'm seeing at the hospital, the channel width is 20 megahertz. That's your optimal channel width for avoiding interference. So if interference was the reason why the Wi-Fi was a little bit on the slow side at this hospital, the 20 megahertz channel is the channel width that's best at avoiding interference. 20 megahertz is the narrowest possible width. 40 megahertz and 80 megahertz are the other two widths. The positive of 40 and 80 is in a clean environment, you can get faster speeds. But if you have a large number of access points, if you have this huge number of access points, then usually your priority is avoiding interference. So using the 20 megahertz wide channel would be the preferable channel width to use to avoid interference. So those are all things that you can see in an assessment just by using a scanner tool. You don't, you know, and these scanner tools can be free. They can be very low cost. Wi-Fi Explorer Pro is $100 US, $100 US for the software. So, you know, maybe to a consumer, that's a little bit on the high side. But I would say for most enterprises, you know, if it's part of your job to get the Wi-Fi network working, $100 isn't too bad. I would say it's probably a relatively reasonable price. So if you can get your hands on a Wi-Fi scanner, you can go through this and identify all these things. And look, those things alone may boost up the performance of this hospital's network. If they drop the transmit power, let's say down to 13 dBm, if they use more than 6 channels, and maybe they already do use more than 6 channels, if they look at their RRM settings and adjust the way that RRM is configured a little bit to try to make it so that other channels are used, that could potentially help a little bit. Those are all things that they could do just based on using a Wi-Fi scanner. They don't have to go to any more complicated tools as part of their assessment. Now, that may not be the case for all environments. You know, you may be in an environment where it's sort of like, let's get this back up here again. Whoops. You may be in an environment where the situation's a little bit more like, well, you know, we've already looked at the transmit power. We're already allowing all 25 of our 2.4 gigahertz channels to be used. Sorry, give me a second here. My whiteboard isn't coming up in the way that I was expecting it to. Okay, now it is. So yeah, whoops, what happened there? Okay, now it's up. Sorry about that. So you may find that, you know, okay, we've already put the transmit power, you know, maybe you're seeing that interference situation that I was seeing, and the transmit power is already down at 12 or 13 or 11 or something like that dBm. It's already at a low. So you say, well, I don't want to put my transmit power too much lower because then I can get crowd failures. Crowd failures is where your scans look good, the network tests well, but then when people arrive, the Wi-Fi performance goes down. When you get a higher density of devices, the Wi-Fi performance really drops significantly. So maybe you want to avoid crowd failures. Say, well, I don't want to lower my transmit power too much below 12, 13, maybe 11 dBm. Maybe you say, well, we've already configured 25 channels, so I can't configure that many more channels. Maybe you say, well, I've already gone through the RRM settings, and you know, we have the RRM settings configured the way we want to configure them. There's not much else we can do about those RRM settings. We're not seeing interference in our scanner anymore due to that. And so, but we're still having an issue. You know, users are still saying the Wi-Fi experience is a little bit on the slow side, etc. If you're still seeing that, then you might need to dig deeper. So again, if I'm going through my steps here and I realize I'm actually already at the 2-hour mark, so a little bit longer than I wanted to be on the stream today. If our number one step is find out if the assessment is needed, if our number 2 step is go to the location, if our number 3 step is get access to a production device, if our number 4 step is do a scan, use a Wi-Fi scanner, preferably on the production device, running on the production device. If you've done all those and you say to yourself, my floor plans look good, my configurations look good, transmit power, you know, all these things look good, I'm still having some type of issue, then you might want to go a little bit deeper. Then you might want to go to, for example, the next step I would say would typically be using a spectrum analyzer. A spectrum analyzer is a device that can show you non-Wi-Fi interference. So interference from a source that's not your own Wi-Fi network, that is not a neighboring Wi-Fi network. You may find there's interference. If you find there is no non-Wi-Fi interference, then you might have to really dig deep, and that's where you would use the protocol analyzer. That's where you would use something like Wireshark, and you would try to dive a little bit deeper into areas like, you know, device behavior, possibly into attacks. You might be able to see that some type of attack is happening in your network by looking at the pattern of Wi-Fi traffic that's going across your network. You might, look into sort of the connection process or the roaming process. You might have to dig a little bit deeper into what's happening on your network. Look at the actual packets, look at the actual frames that are being transmitted and received across your network to try to get an idea of whether there's a problem. And, I'm already at the 2-hour mark. I definitely stayed on a little bit too long. I see I'm getting texts here where I need to quit and address a couple of other things. So I'm going to stop it here. But what I'm going to do is for my next stream, and hopefully I'll get a chance to do it later this week, but for my next stream, we'll go into that protocol analyzer. I didn't run a spectrum analyzer at the hospital. I happened to just have my laptop with me, didn't have a spectrum analyzer adapter with me. But I did get a chance to do packet capture, and so that's what we'll do next time is I'll talk about some of the things to look for inside the packet capture. If you're doing your assessment and you say to yourself, gosh, I've gone through all these things, the floor plans look good, the configs seem to make sense, my scanner shows that I shouldn't have a big Wi-Fi interference problem, I ran my spectrum analyzer, I don't see non-Wi-Fi interference, I don't see a point-to-point wireless link or a telemetry system or anything like that that's causing interference, I'm still having some type of problem on the Wi-Fi, then you might want to really dig deep with the protocol analyzer. And that's what I'll look at next time. The goal is to do it Friday. I know I've said that for like 3 or 4 straight weeks. I'm going to try to do a stream on Friday. I know I haven't done one yet, but I'm really, really going to try hard. The attempted time, I know this may not be great for some of those of you who are in Europe or in other areas of the world, but the time I'm going to shoot for is 3 p.m. Pacific time. So that'd be 3 p.m. Pacific time. That would be 6 p.m. Eastern time zone. That would be if you're in the UK, if my calculations are correct, that'd be about 11 p.m. in the UK. So I know that's a little bit on the late side. If you know UK time, you can kind of figure out what time that would be. But it's a little bit tough to get multiple time periods during the workday for me to be able to do this stuff. But yeah, that's what I'm at least planning for. I'll post on Twitter and again, definitely appreciate if you subscribe or follow. If you look kind of above this, if you look above here, you should see a place where you can subscribe or you can follow, and you'll get a notification when the next stream comes up. Thanks for watching, whether it's live or on YouTube or on Twitch. Definitely appreciate those of you that can subscribe to the old stream here. Again, I'll put the info up there. So yeah, for those of you that can subscribe, definitely very helpful. Still trying to learn Twitch, still trying to unlock a couple of things. I'm still not quite at the subscriber level that I need to be at to be able to unlock some of the stuff I want to unlock. So yeah, definitely appreciate it if you can do that. Other than that, I'll either see you on Friday or I will definitely see you next week at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Until then, have a good one, everybody.